The Bleacher Report top 100 is out. A Jazz player gets snubbed. 3 players get ranked, but where does that rank the Jazz against the rest of the NBA? Plus, Ben Anderson joins us for his final day. Nikola Jokic versus number 2. It's all coming up on today's edition of Locked on Jazz.
You are Locked on Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Sorry, I'm David Locke, radio voice of the Utah Jazz, Jazz NBA Insider. Today, Bleacher Report comes out with their top 100. We know Jokic has won. Ben Anderson's given us a great question to debate in the upcoming segment about where Jokic ranks as number 1 compared to the rest of the NBA. But the Jazz get 3 players ranked. 1 gets snubbed. And what other teams only have 3 players? What other teams have players ranked as high or low? Where do the Jazz rank in all of this? We'll look at that report today. As I mentioned, I'm David Locke, radio voice of the Jazz, Jazz NBA Insider. This is Locked on Jazz. It is a daily podcast on the Utah Jazz, giving you insight, expertise, geeky numbers, and hopefully making it way better to be a Jazz fan each and every day. Thank you very much to the everydayers who join us Monday through Friday. Tip of the hat to you. Thanks so much. Thank you as well to all of you who've made Locked on Jazz your first listen of the day. We are free and available on all podcasting apps as well as on YouTube. Please join the comment section. We've got a great community, and I'm really glad to have you be a part of it today. Shout out, thank you to 5-star reviews and anybody who subscribes on you can on both Spotify now and on Apple. You can leave 5-star reviews, and I greatly appreciate each and every one of you who has done that. They are helpful and they are appreciated. They seem very archaic, but they actually matter. So I do appreciate any of you that do that and drop it for us. Earlier this month, Brent Chappell said, "I love Locke. I really enjoyed the show with Leaf recently. I hope he stays around." He will. He's a great dude. And Utah Jazz Baller, this is my favorite pod. I listen every day. Thank you for being every day. We need David Locke back. Leaf is doing a good job, but I need David Locke back. Well, Leaf has done a great job. So Leaf will still be around. We got the crew. All right. So here's what the Jazz ranked. John Collins ranked 93. Slipped. Walker Kessler ranked 86. And this is what in Bleacher Report's really projecting it for this season, which is a little different. That felt low. Other people have had Walker in the 50s or 60s. The 83 felt low. 86 felt low. And Lauri was 32. So Lauri was the biggest riser of anyone on this list. From off the list to 32. The biggest faller on the list was Rudy Gobert. We'll discuss Rudy a little bit at some point. It's interesting, right? Does the failure of the French team parlay into Rudy, making you think Rudy's less impactful in all ways? He's 31. Has he suddenly slowed down in some capacity? That means that Rudy really is on a sudden downward decline. I find that hard to believe, but it has to happen at some point. This would just be a little more abrupt and a little faster than anyone anticipated. So the Jazz have 32, 86, 93. Clarkson not making the top 100 list, I find hard to believe. That's my snub. The Jazz are going to win a decent amount of games this year. 36, 40, somewhere in that range, maybe 32. Clarkson's going to probably be our point guard and maybe our leading scorer. Lauri's probably the leading scorer, but they're both going to be up in the 20s. There's just enough points to go around. It has to. So it's hard for me to believe that Clarkson's going to score 20 points a game, probably have 5 or 6 assists a game on a team that's going to win a decent amount, be in competition for a play-in, and not be a top 100 player in the NBA. So I find that one, unless they think Clarkson's really, really going to slip. The biggest risers on the list were Lauri, Franz Wagner, Josh Giddey, De'Aaron Fox, Mikal Bridges, Paulo Banchero. I do think this is interesting. So Lauri is a high draft pick breakout. Giddey, Bridges, and Wagner are all 6'8", 6'9", versatile players who were top 15 draft picks. Paulo was the number 1 draft pick, so it's kind of weird that he's a riser. And then De'Aaron Fox, just a late developing 5th pick. Like it all came together. Different coach, frankly, the Luke Walton effect. But I think that's interesting, right? It's the 6'8", 6'9" guy who can handle, who just kind of continues to develops to grow. I think that's really interesting to me that those are the risers. And those are the kind of players we need to go find. as we kind of grow as a franchise. One of the things we talked about this year was, and I'll get into some Jazz comparisons in a second, but we talked about 10, 30, and 50. That to win a title, you need a top 10 guy, you need a top 30 guy, and you need a top 50 guy. That's kind of what our feeling was. Here are the teams that are going to do this year. Celtics have 5 Tatum, 19 Brown, and Porzingis at 43. Nuggets have 1, 16, and they have Gordon at 65. Feels low. The Bucks have 2, 37, and 50, so they can do it. Suns have 8, 9, and 34, so they do it. 76ers are at 4, 22 with Harden, 51 with Maxey. They do it. Warriors are at 6, 45, and 49 with Draymond at 49. Wiggins at 45. Lakers are at 9, 10, and 69 with Reeves, so they're just a little short. Heat have Jimmy Butler at Bam Adebayo and Tyler Heroes at 66. And the Wolves have Anthony Edwards at 15. Is he going to be a top 10 player? Karl Anthony Towns at 23. And Gobert at 62 is the fade. Much exaggerated. So 10, 30, 50 teams. Celtics, Nuggets are close. Bucks, Suns, Sixers, Warriors, Lakers are close. Miami's close. Those are the 8 teams competing for a championship. Probably true. All right. The Jazz have 1 player in the top 60 and 1 player in the top 75. What other teams are similar to that? Now, again, I think Walker probably moves into this category of the top 75. 75 to me is interesting, right? It's your top 2, top 3 players. So here are the teams that only have 1 player in the top 75. Charlotte has LaMelo Ball at 48. The Pistons have Cade Cunningham at 38. The Rockets have Fred VanVleet at 59. The Nets have Mikal Bridges at 25, and I think Cam Johnson at 67. So they have 2 in the top 75 and only 1 in the top 60. Spurs have 0 in the top 60. They have Victor Wembanyama at 63. And the Wizards have 0 in the top 75. So the Jazz have 1 player in the top 75 in the NBA, according to Bleacher Report. Charlotte, Detroit, Houston, Brooklyn, Spurs, and the Wizards. Only 6 other teams don't have a second player in the top 75. Teams whose best player is worse than 32. Well, we could all decide Lowry's better than 32. It's worth a debate. But they don't have Lowry taking a step. I think Lowry takes another step. But they have Lowry at 32. Just right. Inside the structure of what Andy Bailey and a bunch of guys, Andy's great at Bleacher Report did. Andy's, I think you guys all know Andy. He does super, super work. Here are the teams that did not have a player that was worse than 32 as their best player. I thought this was interesting. Charlotte, LaMelo Ball, 48. He's on my list. LaMelo Ball, Anthony Edwards, Donovan, Lowry are on my list of guys who could jump. Donovan was at 20 on this list. DeRozan at 42 for the Bulls. Pistons again, Cade Cunningham at 38. Rockets again, VanVleet at 59. Halliburton at 33, so very similar in Indiana. They have Jalen Brunson at 36 on the Knicks, which means they did not get caught up in the New York bias. The Magic have Paulo at 40, Franz Wagner at 52, which I thought was interesting because they had him 1 notch ahead of Scotty Barnes. Spurs at 63, Washington at 76. So Charlotte, Bulls, Detroit, Rockets, Pacers, Knicks, Magic, Spurs, Washington, 9 teams who do not have a player whose best player is ranked lower than our best player. The Jazz only had 3. How many teams had less than 3 players ranked in the top 100? Washington, whose best player is Jordan Poole at 76. Ouch. Orlando only had Paulo and Wagner. Charlotte, Dallas, Luka and Kyrie are the only 2. Detroit and the Clippers Kawhi, and Paul George. So only 7 teams have less than 3. Teams with 3, like the Jazz, are the Raptors, the Kings, the Pelicans, Miami, the Lakers, and the Bulls. So that's another 6 teams there that are similar to the Jazz. Most of those teams' second best player, all of those teams' second best player, comes in much higher than 86. Raptors, OG is at 46. Sabonis is at 35. Ingram's at 29. Zion's at 28. We'll see. Miami, Bam's at 27. AD's at 10. And Levine's at 44. I love these lists. I think they're super interesting. Few notes I thought were interesting on Bleacher Report's list. Again, I think Clarkson should be on the list. Anthony Simons is 1 notch ahead of CJ McCollum. Franz Wagner's 1 notch ahead of Scotty Barnes. Rudy Gobert is at 62. Victor Wembanyama's at 63. And Chet Holmgren is at 72. That feels super tight on Rudy. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander jumped from 33 to 11. Who does that this year? Does 32 to 11 happen? Lauri Markkanen? Who jumps with LaMelo Ball? 48 to 11? Need some players around him. And it's Nikola Jokic at 1, much further ahead than the second best player in the league in like the history. Well, that's what Ben Anderson asked, and we'll talk about that with Ben when we continue. Today's show is brought to you by Murdoch Hyundai, located at 4646 South State Street, also located in Logan and in Linden. The guys over at Murdoch do amazing work. They want to give you the VIP treatment by being a Locked On Everydayer. So make sure you email me first and give you the full VIP treatment, setting you up before, so you don't, when you walk on the lot, you know exactly who's there, who you're going to see, so you don't have that kind of awkward moment like, hi. No, we're going to have it. You're going to be set up. You're going to know who you're seeing. They're going to take care of you. And some great deals right now. The 2023 Ioniq 5 has $7,500 off of MSRP, which I'm driving the Ioniq 5. The Ioniq 6 also has $7,500 off. I may not dodge this bullet. Oh my gosh, I love that car. The Ioniq 6 is so cool. I went down there the other day. I was working with Cody. They're great head of used car sales. I was like on the edge, and then decided that the Ioniq 5 was just fine. I didn't need to upgrade, but oh my gosh, it's so gorgeous. Plus 3.29% for 5 years on the 2023 Santa Fe's. We have 2 of those. I'm driving one of their Santa Fe's right now. A little sportier than and quicker than kind of some of the others I've driven. It's really, really nice. It's got like, it's kind of a little smaller, got a little bit of a jump to it. Really, really like it. I don't know what they've done in the 2023 version, but this one is really nice. It's all at Murdoch Hyundai, located 4646 South State Street. Today's show is also brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel, go to FanDuel.com/lockedon and take advantage of the FanDuel, America's #1 sports book for the NFL season. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Plus, all customers who bet $5 will get $100 off NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Now is the best time to join FanDuel. The app is easy to use. Football season is here. You can get everything from spreads to player props and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and get off on the right foot for the NFL season with an offer you don't want to miss. That's right. You get $100 off NFL Sunday Ticket with YouTube and YouTube TV, all from FanDuel for a $5 bet. Gets you $200 in bonus bets plus $100 off the NFL Sunday Ticket. Seems like a good deal to me. FanDuel.com/lockedon. Wishing I'd done it. FanDuel.com/lockedon. Kick off the NFL season with an offer you don't want to miss. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL and of Locked On. He's had us thinking for like 3 days, maybe 2 days. Phrase it again, Ben Anderson of KSLSports.com and KSL Sports Zone. Day 3 with Ben. Everydayers know who he is. I just introduced him to everybody else. Ben Anderson, phrase that question again.
How big is the gap between Jokic, the best player in the NBA, and the second best player in the NBA? And how does that gap stack up historically?
Okay, so the second best player in the NBA is probably Steph or Giannis. Do we agree on that?
Yeah, I'd probably take Giannis, but Steph is hard to beat.
Yeah. And I actually am beginning to think that Steph historically is way further ahead than we realize. Like, I think we're missing kind of on Steph historically. That's kind of one of my vibes right now is like,
Okay.
maybe he's actually like the 6th best player of all time.
Yeah, it might be blasphemous, but I would put him over Kobe.
Yeah. Oh, no question.
Kobe.
Yeah. I have him ahead of Kobe. Like, all right. So I think you have to go back to the first area I go back to this is the 2008 to 2013 run of LeBron, where he's really dramatically the best player in the NBA. And I think he might have, like, Rose wins 1 MVP in there, but he probably shouldn't have. Otherwise, LeBron wins 4 out of 5 MVPs. Embiid, I know, won the MVP this year, and so he probably needs to be in that conversation. I think LeBron was unquestionably the best player in the NBA in that time period until Steph came, right? But so I actually think LeBron's gap is bigger. The next realm is obviously the Jordan era. But it's probably the young Jordan era, like with his first 3 championships. Magic's getting older. They're kind of phasing. So I do think he's in of that. And then Larry Bird wins 3 MVPs in a row. But like, there's guys that are nipping at him the whole time. Like, that's Magic and all those. And they're all there. The one that I think the greats, if you and I aren't old enough, I think like you talked to John Lucas, talked to Ron Boone, 70s Kareem, I think they would say the same. They would put into this group together. I'm just taking that from the amount of guys I've talked to over the years. So I think what I really think you've done, which is kind of awesome, is there's Kareem, there's Jordan, there's LeBron, and there's Jokic, who have had runs where they're clearly, undeniably the best player in the league. Steph and Duncan need to be kind of in there somewhere in that grouping as well. Like, that would be my, but Duncan's doing it when Olajuwon's around. And so that's like probably, to my, like, if you ask me the single most underrated player in the history of the NBA, it's Hakeem Olajuwon.
Okay. I would say Duncan, but a lot of people have Duncan in their top 10. And not everyone has
yeah, right. So I love Tim Duncan, like like he won 75% of his games. Like, last time I checked, we're keeping score.
And by the way, I'm not trying to make the case for Jokic. I'm asking myself, does Denver win 3 titles in a row, or is the gap not that big? Is he not that dominant? Because Shaq at his best was going to win 3 in a row. Jordan at his best was going to win 3 in a row. Magic, Kareem at their best were going to win 3 in a row.
I mean, the Shaq at his best is such an interesting one, because I just don't think anyone actually really remembers. Like, there were so many complaints about it and this and that, and like, go back and look at some of those numbers.
I'll tell you, in my lifetime, Shaq at his best is the best player I've ever seen.
Yeah, I think that's like just physically, like, I mean, probably the way Wilt Chamberlain was for a while.
Yeah, but one.
Right. Yeah, right. Didn't have Bill Russell floating around. I mean, gosh, yeah. I mean, the thing about it though is, like, that Bill Russell just luckily never played with super teams. I mean, other than the 7 Hall of Famers he played with.
Yeah. His team.
That is, like, seriously, like, I can keep a pretty straight face when I'm interacting with friends or people that, like, I don't know, like, I think that after 30 years, probably know the NBA pretty well. And like, if I'm just chatting with someone who doesn't work in the NBA and they actually have a job, they probably know law better than I do, and they know business better than I do, but I might know the NBA. The one that, like, sends me through the roof is, why do these guys need super teams? I'm like, I know, Larry Bird, gosh, Kevin McHale, Robert Parrish, Dennis Johnson, like Danny Ainge, like, yeah, he didn't need Bill Walt, right? Yeah, gosh, you're right. And Magic Johnson, James Worthy, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, like, yeah, you're right. Like, right, like, like LeBron James, the team that still, to me, is like one of the greatest accomplishments of all time is LeBron James's Cleveland Cavaliers team that gets to the NBA Finals, and I think I think they get swept or they lose to the Spurs in 5. And it's got like Anthony Parker, Anderson Varejao, Zydrunas Ilgauskas. Like, it's crazy how bad it is. I just pulled up an interesting note, by the way. I don't know what I think of win shares as a number, but I just pulled it just because that was my thought. This is super interesting. Okay. It must be win shares is like preaches to dominance. So Michael Jordan had the most win shares in the NBA for 7 straight years from 1986 to 1993. He then retires and has it for the next 2. So he literally had the most win shares for 9 straight years. Karl Malone has it for 2 years. Shaq has it for 2. Duncan for 2. Garnett for 2. Nowitzki for 2. And then LeBron has the most win shares for 5 straight years, only surpassed by Durant. Then Harden has the most win shares for 5 of the next 6 years, despite Jake Scott's hatred of him. Since then, Steph Curry snuck in once, by the way. Nikola Jokic has had the most win shares for 3 straight. It's actually like a very dominant stat. Like, I don't like
it passes the eye test.
Yeah, like, and also like it really tells you that MVP and some of these other things, we just get really bored or we get personal. But that one, like the dominant player according to win shares, has been very consistent year in and year out.
And it will be Jokic again this year, assuming he's healthy.
Right. Yeah.
And probably next year.
Yeah.
I mean, he's not close to slowing down.
No, and his reaction to a championship led me to believe he could win a lot in a row and not be bothered by it.
We might be on the verge of something special. He is special, and it might get even higher.
All right. Give me your thoughts on how the rookies fit in this year.
I think Keontae George plays the earliest. I think Taylor Hendricks does get a shot, and there probably is actually an opportunity for him to get a few minutes here and there in the front court. I don't know how Bryce Sensabaugh sees the floor. But also there's a chance that Bryce Sensabaugh, if he hits 40% of his threes and is a standstill three-point shooter and rebounds as well, he's actually a very good rebounder. If he can do that, he might be able to carve out a role. It's not what he did at Ohio State. That's not an NBA. Nobody in the NBA does that. So I don't know what that is. But if he can do a little bit of that, that's how he gets on the floor. But I think it's a 2-man race with Keontae George and Taylor Hendricks. And I would say that Keontae George has a pretty good lead.
And what's your thoughts on we just don't know on Taylor Hendricks, and he kind of played in a funky, what is your expectation? What is your feeling on what's fair that we should be anticipating here?
I would be all about glimpses for Taylor Hendricks. I'm not expecting.
Goes back a little bit to your theory, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I want to see a game where he has 14, 8, and 3. And if he does that,
and the threes blocks,
3 blocks, which he'll do. He'll get 3 blocks before he gets 14 points. That would be my bet I would put out this year. But you know what I mean? I fully believe in his skill set. And I don't want to go back too heavy on the draft. And I can look at all the things and feel and all these things that I like about guys and what makes me like guys. And you just sometimes just pay attention. Does the guy block a lot of shots? And does he hit a lot of threes? It's like, that works. Those things work. Those things translate to the NBA.
You did a great job on the draft. I actually listened a ton and stuff. And I thought your break, I actually was, I was gaining information from you. So great work on that. Here was what was interesting to me on Taylor Hendricks. I did not think he had a good offensive feel. I thought I saw him all the time, spacing into another player, spacing in. Yet his defensive feel obviously had to be fairly good because he's blocking shots from the weak side, mostly the secondary defenders. Did you see that? Does that vibe with what you saw?
Yeah, his feel offensively is goofy at best. You know what I mean? I mean, he is just not, which is why I've seen some people say, you can play him at the 3. He's not skilled enough. You can't play him at the 3. He can't dribble. He's not going to dribble. He can't play the 3. But defensively, I think actually some of his natural instincts were unique for a guy that wound up at that school. I mean, I know he's from the area, but to be there. And then, his weak side shot blocking, but even some of the on-ball shot blocking, which is super unique. Even in college a little bit. I mean, you see it in the summer league. You see guys getting jump shots blocked that you never see. And you see that in college as well. But some of that just tells me he's got to feel that he's just outplaying people that should be his peers and they're not. So I like that he's been at an elevated level, and I do fully believe in his defensive feel, but I'm not expecting him to be, super switchy big man right off the bat, or maybe even ever. But he can be good enough as a rim protector and then 3-point shooter to have a ton of value.
One thing I did do, I wasn't sold on Jerice Walker, so I went and watched Jerice Walker's block shots and I watched Taylor Hendricks block shots. And the reason I was more sold on Taylor Hendricks and Jerice Walker is Taylor Hendricks was coming from further away. One thing that's a little misleading about college block shots is because the game has such terrible floor spacing, you don't actually have to go anywhere to go get that weak side block shot. You're actually 5 feet. In the NBA, if you're going to have a weak side block shot, you're coming from 15 to 18 feet. The ball's coming from the other side. You're coming either from a guy, you're guarding a 3-point shooter in all likelihood, and you're coming off that 3-point shooter to get to the rim defensively. It's a long way to go. Taylor Hendricks did more of that than Jerice Walker, which I think is an encouraging thought for those block shots.
And was on, I don't know, but you can if this is or not, on a way worse team.
Yeah.
I mean, Chris Walker had a bunch of really good players around him and a bunch of good defensive players where he could kind of go in and say, well, this is my opportunity. Taylor Hendricks cleaning up a lot.
Yep. Good point. All right. He is Ben Anderson. It's good to have him with us. We'll talk about a little bit about the West. We'll talk a little bit more about Keontae. I have a few more questions on Keontae, and we'll continue with Ben here on Locked On Jazz. Thanks very much for tuning in. By the way, football fans, the previews are up. They're awesome. They're incredible. They're amazing. I'm so proud of them. I love our guys. They just do amazing work. The college previews are by conference. So SEC, Big 12, ACC, Pac-12. Who did I forget? Oh, Big 10. Yeah, my daughter only is a Big 10 kid. I probably should be remembering that. And then the NFL ones are up and coming. And they're just great. So things I'm most proud of that we do at Locked On and appreciate it. So make sure you go check those out as your second listen of the day. Ben Anderson could tell some funny stories about Locked On. There was a short period of time where Ben Anderson was the only other employee at Locked On. I was the employee.
You have a pretty good tree of people you've hired, and I'm grateful to be a part of that. But I think I helped bring on your Locked On Giants people, and she is so great, and I see her everywhere, and she's awesome.
Patricia, yeah. So I remember.
She had Mina Kimes on, like. I don't know about you, Dave. I think Mina Kimes is the best media member on the planet right now. I love Mina Kimes, and they had Mina Kimes on. Like that's awesome.
That's good. Yeah, I remember vividly. I don't know if you remember this, but I was driving to my son racing in Wenatchee in the national championship, and you were holding down the fort of Locked On, and I kind of remember that as like, gosh, is this thing like? There's just these moments, right? You look back, like now we're like, whatever we are, like. It's kind of crazy, right? Like we're going to have, we could end up with like 300 million listens this year. Like, and that ranks really, really high up on sports podcast networks. So it's just funny because I do like the drive to Wenatchee, like calling you as I was on things. Hey, Ben, what about this? Or where's this? Or like, how are we going to get through this? Just feeling so overwhelmed. So anyway, Ben's super valuable to this network and he's grown into his own. I try not to bring that up. I probably bring it up to the last segment on purpose because Ben's built his own life and is no longer has no shadows that he is peering underneath of. Check out Ben's top 50 players of Jazz history on his 50th year anniversary. That's at KSLSports.com. So I'm not the most people misunderstand that I don't like someone when it's actually out of respect to how awesome the NBA is. Like I have just the ultimate respect of how great all these players are. So I'm not particularly optimistic about rookie guards because Kevin Durant shot 39% when he was a rookie. And I think LeBron shot like 41. And I think like Dame Lillard shot like 38 and he had played 3 years in college. So I'm not super optimistic on what I think like someone like Keontae George can actually do, even if he's going to be great along the way. But what do you think? What's your thoughts on how the Keontae George season goes?
Yeah, I think he's going to drown a couple of times. I mean, obviously, look at Ochai had played really high level basketball for a long time and was a great shooter and came in. And if you look at his shooting numbers, they just weren't fantastic. It's just really hard to shoot in the NBA. It's hard to be a good shooter. As good as Keontae shot the ball in summer league, I don't think those necessarily translate right away. But some of the flashes, the types of shots he can take. I mean, he's a difficult shot maker, and that's his value. But you don't do that your first year. I mean, I just don't think Jason Tatum wasn't able to do it his first year and was one of the best difficult shot makers I ever saw here at Summer League when they were playing up at the Huntsman Center. I mean, just made crazy shots.
We've been fooled by Donovan, right? Donovan fooled us. Right.
Exactly. So his percentages are going to look probably more similar to Baylor than they did Summer League. And I think that's totally reasonable and fair. And I wouldn't even say it's a reason to panic at all. I do think his feel was way better. I know we just talked about feel with Taylor Hendricks and Jarris Walker and some of those questions as well. His feel was better with the ball in his hands. But there are guys who are so good in high school that college basketball is the last thing on their mind, even while they're there. And I would tell you, is it Jaden McDaniels with the Timberwolves? Yep. I mean, if you watched him at Washington, he was looking at the ground most of the time. He had no interest in being there, didn't want to be there, didn't trust whoever he was around, and actually played with some decent players. But
the rules said he had to be there.
Yeah, he had to be there. So whatever. I have to be here, and I was the number 1 overall recruit or whatever it was. I'm going to put in 25 games. I'm going to go to the NBA, and I'm going to do my thing, and I promise you I'm going to be fine.
Right, and I'm probably not going to class right now.
And I think that's what happened. I don't know about class, but I think that's what happened with Keontae George.
There was somebody I talked to, and this was interesting. This was long before the Jazz drafted him. This was early, like March, February, maybe conversation about who said to me, like, I don't get the vibe that the Baylor, I don't know if this is true. So I'm not trying to, aggregators probably aren't listening to this show, but their viewpoint was that maybe the veteran guards that were on that team just weren't really that interested in having a young freshman score 30 a night. And like, if you actually look at some of Keontae George's numbers, there's like, they went on an overseas trip, if I recall, to start the year last year. And he like lights him up and goes crazy. You can find a bunch of articles about that he's kind of going, he's getting kind of massive. And then he drops like 23 and 20 in 2 of the first few games. And then I think he had like a 27 and 30 back to back or something like that. And then all of a sudden it like just disappears. Now it could have been the sprained ankle, but it also could have been like, actually, we're not so cool with this.
Yep. And yeah, we're a team that's been to the national championship. Some of those guys had been on a national championship roster and aren't going to hand the ball over to the new kid, the top 5 overall recruit, who the coach said, yeah, we're only going to have this kid for 1 year. Knew it from the day he committed.
That's the other one that I would like to, I wish I could get on every single one of these kids when they come in. We do we sometimes used to be able to do interviews when they came in. I used to always want to ask them, hey, by the way, at what day in the season were you thinking about the fact you were going pro? Because on that day, you stopped diving for balls. You stopped going as hard because you needed to preserve $10 million. And I appreciate that and respect that. And if you were my child, I would like you to do the same thing because it's $10 million.
Yeah.
And those, all 10 of them count and they're real. And so I would do the exact same thing. So I always used to want to ask that question. Like, hey, by the way, at what point? Oh, day 1. Great. Then I will not look at anything in that season and think it matters. You were just talking about the league. Who are your top 4 in the Western Conference?
Denver is going to accidentally win a bunch of games because Jokic is so good. They don't have to win a lot of games. They can turn it on in the playoffs and beat whoever. And I would bet that they would be the favorite to repeat. I mean, they are the favorite to repeat. I would put them as my favorite as well. You got to respect Phoenix just because that amount of talent is absurd. Though I do think I know Chris Paul was the issue last year late. I also think the best basketball they've ever played was when Chris Paul was healthy. So can they replace that? They also don't have that point guard as good as Devin Booker is, and can play point guard at times. So I'll put Phoenix at 2. I might be crazy. I'm fully believing in Anthony Edwards. I'm fully on board with Anthony Edwards. And David, I'll tell you, I think this year Anthony Edwards surpasses Devin Booker. I think he's there. I think defensively he has a chance to be an all NBA or an all defensive team member this year. And I think he's going to be great offensively. So I totally believe in that. Can they figure it out with Karl Anthony Towns and Gobert, or do they trade one of those guys and get better? I would not be stunned if Minnesota ends up at 4, but then I got to pick 3.
Tony Jones, by the way, had Minnesota at 4 too.
Okay. Tony and I apparently are.
Well, I think
I'm like-minded as we are.
Right. Like, I actually think that Anthony Edwards becomes so good that Karl Anthony Towns has to buy it. He just has no choice.
Yeah. And I hope he does.
Right.
I hope he does.
Rudy loves Anthony Edwards, by the way.
Who does?
Rudy.
Gobert?
Yeah. Oh.
I mean, I saw him working out in the offseason.
Yeah, no, when I talked to Rudy at the training, he was like, this kid's really gets it, wants to win, loves him, loved him.
3.
Memphis had 51 wins last year. Sacramento 48, Clippers 44, Warriors 44, Lakers 43, but after the trades, they were much better. Who's your 3?
Lakers aren't going to play enough to get to 3. Golden State's probably not going to play enough to get to 3. It's probably Memphis. They're just good. I know Ja's not going to be there for 25 games, and I know that culture might be all screwy around him. Memphis is pretty good.
All right, so Marcus Smart's impact. Here's my one worry on Memphis. I think this is the most untalked about thing in the league. And that is just like scars. I saw it firsthand with us, right? We just lost too many times in the playoffs. We had just too many losses. And then the second thing that I think is not talked about enough in the league is being the 1 seed and then getting nothing for it. Like, I don't know how Adrian Griffin motivates the Milwaukee Bucks this year, right? Yeah. They went and got the 1 seed and they got knocked out in the first round. Like, you can tell Adrian Griffin can tell those guys whatever he wants to tell them. And the only thing he can say is, if we don't do that, we're not going to be ready. But they're not playing game 43 with any gusto if they don't want to, because it showed no value to them. Memphis is getting close to that. Memphis has been like the last few years, right? Memphis has been kind of right on the knocking on the door of last year, number 2 seed. And the previous year, I think they were like right up there, 2 or 3 seed. Like, I think Taylor Jenkins is going to have a really hard time keeping that level up for an entire season with that group and not becoming deaf, having the kind of the message go deaf. So that's might be why Marcus Smart's important.
Very important. I'm curious how high Justin Jackson Jr.'s ceiling is.
Yep.
It might not be that much higher than what it is right now.
And Sacramento cannot.
Or Jaren Jackson. Jaren Jackson Jr. Excuse me. And then how good is Desmond Bane? Sacramento's a big question. Maybe Oklahoma City's maybe ready to make the jump that Sacramento did.
Interesting. Though they did only go 500 last year.
Yeah.
Feels like everyone's a year early on them. That's my vibe on that. All right, Ben, you're great.
They might be a year early for so long that it passes them by and they never actually realize their potential. To steal a Locke term, they've been dipping that cookie for a long time.
They have. Ben Anderson, he's great. Catch him at KSLSports.com. Send him a thanks at Ben Hoops and listen to him with Jake Scott. Great work. Thank you very much for taking the time with us. I appreciate the week.
Thanks, David.
He is Ben Anderson. Thank you very much. You are listening to Locked On Jazz. Thanks to the Everydayers. Thank you for making Locked On Jazz your first listen. Have a wonderful weekend.